We're going to be going over some of the questions from the reading in pages 173 to 178, going over those answers. So if you would please take those out, and we'll talk through that. And then tomorrow and tomorrow and Wednesday, we're going to be watching another Frontline video. This one is on, it's called The New Asylums, and it's about the institutionalizing of mental illness and then deinstitutionalizing it. So it's kind of a history of that. You'll watch that tomorrow. And you have the, Jazz, you have the link for that and also the questions for that in Teams, links and facts. Okay, so number one, what connection is the author wanting to make in this chapter?
There are treatments and that there are treatments based off of your world.
Right. So he's making this connection between treatment theories and worldview. So your worldview will determine as a psychiatrist, right, or a psychologist, mostly psychiatrist, your worldview will determine your treatment theory. What does the author say greatly influences one's beliefs about treatment? We already said your worldview, but what your worldview believes about what? So it will be determined by what you believe causes abnormal thoughts. How was mental illness treated during the Middle Ages? Right. Very good. Yes. So they understood any abnormal thoughts, feelings, behaviors to be demon possession, and so people were either exercised and or punished for that. What is the etymology, meaning the history of the word bedlam? Let's start there.
It started as Bethlehem Royal Hospital, which was the first asylum which people shortened to Bedlam for any other asylum. And the type of people in asylums led for the association between work and Bedlam and their behavior of like uproar and disorder.
Right. So what it's come to mean then, this shortening of or changing, Bethlehem to Bedlam. It's come to refer to all mental hospitals, kind of like Kleenex. Doesn't matter if it's actually Kleenex brand, we call it Kleenex, right? So it came to kind of to define all mental hospitals, but also any sort of uprising or disorder or uproar is bedlam. Like if, I think I've talked to some of your classes about the woman who taught next to me my first year of teaching. I think I told the story about the guy that walked out on the ledge. And I mean, I had trouble teaching because there was so much noise, there was so much activity. She had zero control of her classroom. It was bedlam, right? That's what you would call that. Everything was out of control. Now, originally it referred to patients in mental hospitals, behaving, in that sort of way, but it's come to mean any sort of disorder. Explain how those with mental illness were treated in colonial times through the 18th century. Start there. Right. So they were treated as lunatics and were generally, what was the second thing you said? Or they were called lunatics. Treated as animals. Yeah, they were generally cared for at home. Some states began opening and running asylums in about the mid 1700s. They were generally cared for at home. And then, how did that change in the 19th century? Right. So, and also, I think I wrote down. I'm sorry. Eventually, most in the 18th century, eventually most of the mentally ill were hospitalized, where they were treated horribly. But then in the 19th century, they began being treated more humanely. And that's because people began to understand mental illness better and realize that, but for the grace of God, they're alive. That it wasn't something moral, some moral failure in them. What is a lobotomy? We talked about this early on, and why was it used? So you wouldn't have known this before, Leah, but it's a severing of the connections in the frontal lobe of the brain, and it was used at first, at least, on severely agitated or schizophrenic patients. However, it ended up being done on over 40,000 adults and children. What was that guy's name? Walter Freeman. My encyclopedia. Yeah, Walter Freeman was largely, you don't want to hear about him. Oh, great. Great. Way to disturb poor Louise. And she joined the class anyway. I mean, that's great. You did, yeah, it's pretty gruesome, isn't it? So, yeah, that's the next question. Who developed the transorbital lobotomy? That's Walter Freeman. And what were the effects of the surgery? For some patients, right, they were less agitated, they were more calm, but it also blunted the personality. It kind of made you emotionless. If you had an outgoing personality before, you were kind of blank, and even an introvert, is blank. So it had some pretty severe side effects. And some became childish, some became apathetic, irresponsible. They weren't that way before. What do convulsive therapies induce? Start with that. Brain seizures. Yay, that's another, Walter Freeman-like thing. And why were they used in therapy? Because all that after patients. Yeah, so to remove or reduce the symptoms of mental illness. There's always the question, though, of is that humane? What does is that did you answer that one? How far did you get? 15? Yeah. Okay. Wow. Long ways. Okay. What does ECT stand for? Right. And what did doctors hope to accomplish? What are you trying to do? improve behavior or control behavior of someone. Reduce symptoms. I guess they wanted to reduce symptoms, but they were misused. And, it came to just control behavior. There are other ways you can do that, right? You've never seen the child whisperer, Mrs. Shaw. She's able to do that. She doesn't shock anybody into a harness or anything like that. So there are other ways to do that. What is psychopharmacology? I asked that before. Question.
The study of drugs' effect on cognitive
processes. So it's the use of psychoactive drugs to control mental illness. That's the or the study of those drugs. So how do psychiatric drugs work? Yep, they alter the way the neurotransmitters in the brain work. Okay, so there are 4 categories of psychiatric medications. So we have antipsychotic, which are also neuroleptics, and that treats a psychotic episode or psychotic episodes. Breaks with reality by blocking the dopamine receptors. Which is interesting because dopamine generally makes you feel better. And then antidepressants treats depression by increasing the availability of norepinephrine and serotonin or serotonin. Anxiolytics treats sleep disorders by enhancing the neurotransmitter GABA. It slows down impulses. It's a mood stabilizer. It's also used to stop manic mania, and depression and bipolar. Number 12, after reading about psychiatric drugs, what is your opinion of their use in treating mental illness? You have a question?
No, I don't have any more answers.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's clear that all the psychiatric drugs have a good purpose or intent, but I think they should be used with caution and sparingly since they are so strong. And they could, just as easily as they can help, if you use too much over the wrong time, it can also send a wrong form of imbalance.
What did you say, Sid? Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I put that I believe it's a both and, so it's not therapy or psychiatric drugs. It's a combination, a responsible combination, right, of the two. It's not an either or, but responsible use of those drugs, they're very powerful. They can have pretty severe side effects. So you don't want to make the problem worse, and yet you also don't want to keep a person in, Gerald or, some other schizophrenic or some other, those little children that were, diagnosed with bipolar. They're depressed and they're, not who they could be. So we have to find some sort of help that is helpful. What is deinstitutionalization? Kristen?
It's the basically getting rid of institutions, not just putting people away or having mental illness.
Right. It's the widespread release of the mentally ill from psychiatric hospitals to community-based treatment centers. So they're no longer hospitalized, if you will. They're no longer inpatient. But Sid, what were some of its unintended consequences? Yeah, a huge portion of our homeless population is mentally ill. And so, there's this sort of that dilemma of which is better, institutions or homelessness. And so, yeah, it caused a dramatic increase in homelessness, but also people going to jail and prison because their communities just didn't have the resources to help them. We are just now. There was a mental health hospital in Omaha called Richard Young, and it closed more than 10 years ago, probably. And we have been in a situation in Omaha with an inability to care for the mentally ill population for many, many years. And Manuel was the only psych hospital, only one. And you had to, and I know this, not personal my experience, but from people I know personally, you had to be like maniacal. You had to be suicidal or on a rage to kill people to actually be because they were so and so all these people falling through the cracks. And we've just recently, I think it's UNMC, I'm pretty sure it's UNMC because the head of psychiatry at UNMC is Katie Manning's. I remember having a conversation about this when it was first being, first started. And that should help. But that's a place like Omaha, right? That's a fairly big city. What about Sidney, Nebraska? What about Fordville, Nebraska? They don't have those kinds of opportunities. They don't have those kinds of facilities there. So the community's resources need to be improved, and a lot of them end up in homeless shelters as well. So describe treatment under Freudian. I always want to apologize to you. Freudian psychotherapy.
Had this thing called a talking tour where they had the famous reclining couch that you just let them lay there and kind of just speak whatever they wanted to speak about, trying to find the unconscious thoughts that's leading.
Yeah, it was talk therapy, and we still use that, right? That's still a very valid form of therapy. And so through this conversation with the patient, the therapist hoped to bring up unconscious memories, feelings, motivations to light, because, Freud was all about the unconscious. Now, the idea of talk therapy has definitely survived, and there's still this sense of stuff that we don't really realize about ourselves. It's kind of unconscious that we need to learn. So those unconscious memories, feelings, motivations would be confronted in order to address the problem. And then what is free association? Yeah, so you just, whatever, puppies is the first thing that comes into or baby goats wearing pajamas, or whatever it is that first comes to your mind, you just talk about it. And you just talk about random things, about anything that comes to mind, no matter how irrelevant it is, no matter how unconnected it is to your mental health. And Freud believed that it was a key to unlocking unconscious thought. Not sure that that's true, but that's what Freud thought. Okay, questions on this? Well, it's a good job. We are done for today. I'm trying to, make it so that there's no homework, or we're in a decent place. I think this is a good place to be before Easter break. So we'll watch the video on the new asylums tomorrow and Wednesday, and then we get to and then we get Jazz back too. So I'm excited to have you back, Jazz.